Hi there, and happy Independence Anniversary to all Nigerians viewing us on our various platforms around the world. Welcome to our series of conversations, which we call the Channels Forum. Here we seek to take a bird's-eye view of happenings in three critical sectors of our national life today: security, the economy, as well as the emphasis on youth involvement ahead of the 2023 elections. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. Welcome. In 1960, at Nigeria's independence, its population was about a quarter of its current estimates of between 206 and 220 million, depending on whose figures you're going with. That has had its impact on the standards of education, the economy, and healthcare, as well as the politics, just to mention a few. Today, it is estimated that at least 70% of that population qualifies as youth, bringing with it a whole new set of challenges associated with what is called the youth bulge. Chronic underemployment and unemployment is said to be feeding into the most salient of our present-day realities, that is, the security challenges. On tonight's program, we will try to get some insight into these issues with a series of expert panels dissecting the trends and themes. So let's start off with security, and our correspondent Victor Matas has this report.
We are going to erect and maintain an efficient, disciplined, people-friendly, and well-compensated security forces within an overall security architecture.
To back up these words, 43 days later, President Muhammadu Buhari effected a change in the hierarchy of the armed forces when he relieved the service chiefs appointed by his predecessor and appointed those who implement his vision of a safe and secure Nigeria, with Gabriel Oloni-Shakin as Chief of Defense Staff, Tukur Buratai as Chief of Army Staff, Sadiq Abubakar as Chief of Air Staff, and Ibok Ete Ibas as Chief of Naval Staff taking over the military architecture. However, they could not help the president in fulfilling his promise of leading from the front and rescuing the abducted Chibok girls. Though they rescued some, about 100 were still in captivity when they left office, while under their watch, other students, though later rescued, were abducted by Boko Haram in Government Girls Science Technical College in Dapchi, Government Science Secondary School, Kankara, Katsina State, and an Islamic school in the same Katsina State. These were in addition to the farmer-herder crisis in Adamawa, Benue, Nasarawa, banditry and cattle rustling in Katsina, Kaduna, and Zamfara that displaced millions and resulted in the loss of lives, property, and livelihood, as well as the continued Boko Haram onslaught in the northeast and pipeline vandalism and oil bunkering, as well as secessionists in the south. Against this backdrop was continued calls by Nigerians for the removal of the service chiefs.
Nigerians who are calling for them to be removed, most of them are calling from the perspective of being ordinary concerned citizens. They don't understand, the intricacies and things involved. All they want is they want the problems to be solved, regardless of how the problems are solved. They don't know the capabilities and capacities of our military services.
Since the change of guard with General Lucky Irabo as Chief of Defense Staff, Lieutenant General Ibrahim Atahiru, who died in a plane crash and succeeded by Lieutenant General Farouk Yahya as Chief of Army Staff, Air Marshal Isiaka Amao as Chief of Air Staff, and Vice Admiral Awal Gambo as Chief of Naval Staff, more schools have been attacked, including the Nigerian Military School, the Abuja-Kaduna train, the Kaduna Airport, the Presidential Guard, a police post, the invasion of Kuje Prison, amidst kidnappings and attacks on places of worship, beheading of serving officers by secessionists, and a sit-at-home order by IPOB. The military, though, says they have recorded some successes, especially as the 2023 general elections draw near.
We have made huge progress, and of course there still remains a long haul to go, and we will do everything possible such that the state of peace will incrementally improve, leading up to, of course, next year, that that there's a very important exercise that the nation is going to go through.
Other recorded success include the killing of Abu Musab al-Burnawi and other top Boko Haram commanders, as well as the surrender of thousands of their foot soldiers, the sentencing of 2 soldiers who killed a Muslim cleric, and the confession of a pastor who kidnapped a priest. Under President Muhammadu Buhari, telecommunication services were shut down in the northeast and northwest as troops battled Boko Haram insurgents, bandits and cattle rustlers. Also, the budgetary allocations to security sector rose by over 100% since 2015, from less than 1 trillion naira to 2.41 trillion naira, leading to the acquisition of equipment across military formations in the country, including Super Tucano jets and armored tanks, amongst others.
You have seen our soldiers running into Cameroon. When the ammunition gets finished, they drop their gun and they run into Cameroon. And they confess and they go on video from there. And the High Command was threatening them. So,
as the elections draw near and the Buhari presidency keeps trying to keep its constitutional mandate of protecting lives and property, the security sector is one that the next administration will do well to prepare for. Victor Matthias, Channels Television News.
All right, thank you very much, Victor. Well, today, earlier in the day, the President, Muhammadu Buhari himself, addressed the issue of security or insecurity, depending on where you're looking at it from, in his very final, he did say that, very final Independence Day address to the country. Let's take a listen.
In order to address insecurity, we worked methodically in reducing insurgency in the northeast, militancy in the Niger Delta, ethnic and religious tensions in some sections of Nigeria, along with other problems threatening our country. As we continue to de-escalate the security challenges that confronted us at the inception of this administration, newer forms alien to our country began to manifest, especially in the areas of kidnappings, molestation, killings of innocent citizens, banditry, all of which are being addressed by our security forces. I share the pains Nigerians are going through, and I assure you that your resilience and patience will not be in vain as this administration continues to reposition as well as strengthen the security agencies to enable them to deal with all forms of security challenges. At the inception of this administration in 2015, I provided the funding requirements of the security agencies, which was also improved in my second tenure in 2019 to enable them to surmount security challenges. We will continue on this path until our efforts yield the desired results.
President Muhammadu Buhari earlier on in the day today speaking about the state of security under his administration in his final Independence Day broadcast. Of course, the Channels Forum, we've got two hashtags for it. There's hashtag Channels Forum and hashtag Nigeria at 62. So as we begin the conversations, would love to hear from you. But let's start off from our Maiduguri studios at the heart of the insurgency that this present administration met when it took over in 2015. And from there, we're being joined by Major General Chris Musa, the theater commander of Operation Hardin Kai, the Joint Task Force in the Northeast. General, thank you for your time. Good evening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
The situation now is that it appears as if a lot of attention has shifted away from the Northeast to other theaters across the country. But it does appear as if there are still some challenges, even though it's been a long time since this has been on the cards, but there are still some challenges in that area. What can you tell us about that today?
Yeah, thank you very much. Happy 62nd independence anniversary in Nigeria. Yeah, as we're all aware as humans, challenges are natural. There will always be challenges, and it is exactly what we do with the challenges that matter. I'm sure from the reports we have been receiving, the Northeast is getting better by the day, and we keep on improving on what we're doing. We remain focused to ensure that we achieve the mandate.
It does appear as if, of course, as you said, you have tackled some of the challenges that you met. But then it does appear as if some of those challenges, having been tackled, have brought about new challenges. Let me give you an example. Many of the areas that have been recovered from the insurgents, there is the challenge of holding them against the insurgents and allowing the people who were previously resident there to be able to go back there and resume their lives. That's a new challenge that came from recovering the territory. How are you coping with that?
We're doing pretty well. As it is, I think our greatest challenge now is the climate. Now we have the rains and we have floods. We have flood all over. Normally people don't really understand that places like Maiduguri, you will have a situation with floods. So a lot of the areas now that are cleared, floods won't even allow you to get in there.
So where are you keeping the people who would ordinarily be there at this point in time? And how are you ensuring
they're all pulled out.
How are you ensuring that the insurgents don't use this flood to get back in?
No, it's been very difficult for them because we are actually making sure that we take over their logisticians. We realize that those people that still trade with them are the ones that actually keep them going. So we have adopted strategies now to deny them contact with their logisticians, and we pick them on a regular basis, and that has denied them the ability to get logistics to carry on with their operations. And then while we provide corridors where we pull out those ones that are willing to come out, and then we bring them out quickly.
How are you able to tackle, because I remember when I spoke to you much earlier on this year, you did say that one of the challenges you were facing and you were trying very hard to tackle is this hit and run thing where they stay at the border areas between Nigeria and Cameroon, between Nigeria and Chad, between Nigeria and Niger. They come in, they carry out these attacks, and then they run back to the border areas, which makes it difficult for you to be able to tackle them once and for all. Has that situation changed now?
Yeah, it has improved now. We have improved our cooperation and conduct of operations with the multinational joint task force. That's having Cameroon, Chad, and Niger together, and then with Operation Emergence 4 from Cameroon. So the borders now are properly manned, and whenever they try to fizzle out to those areas, the forces there take care of them.
When you have, because what you pointed out is that these days in that area, because they can't really go after the hard targets anymore, they go after softer targets, markets, schools, hospitals, and places where, you know, you don't expect there to be too much security. And then you talked about connivance between the local communities and the insurgents. So those twin issues, has the situation changed now?
Yeah, that's what I told you. The connivance is from the logisticians that are making money from the challenge. And so what we are doing now is we have adopted measures. We monitor the markets where they buy these things and then follow up to where they deliver them. And then we arrest those ones with the items they've taken. So the terrorists can't get this logistics, so it makes it very difficult for them. Now, their ability to move as freely as they used to is curtailed because our operations are everywhere. In our system is to kill a gorilla, you fight like a gorilla. So we have adopted that system. And because we're better trained, we're able to take them out as quickly as possible.
That leaves something else on the horizon, which is that you're not able to hear me. Are you able to hear me now?
Okay, I can hear you now, yes, I can hear you now.
You had told us earlier that a lot of them were surrendering to you, along with the families. So it presented a logistic issue because you now had to keep them, you had to process them, you had to separate the ones who are actual insurgents from just family members who may be referred to as victims. And when I spoke to you earlier on this year, at that time, you said you had more than 50,000 of them in your custody. My assumption now is that that number has probably increased.
80,000 now.
So how are you keeping this 80,000 and preventing the more hardened ones amongst them from returning?
We have, the strategy now is an all government activity. The military, the Operation Hardin Kai, working together with the state government. On the point of impact was when the terrorist comes out from the bush, he reports to the closest unit. The commander takes him with his men, and then he is profiled. We disarm him, profile him. The state government provides the transport that they take them into Maiduguri, where we have the 3 camps. The 4th camp is being constructed now. So that's how we handle it. We are not directly the ones in charge of the administration and management. The state government takes care of them. We simply make sure that we're able to identify who are the fighters and who are the non-fighters, and we separate them and then put them at different camps. The state government takes care of their management and administration. So we take care of the perimeter security. Nobody from out comes in, nobody from in goes out to disturb the operation.
I cannot but ask you about that seminal place, which some people would say brought all of this to... can you hear me, General? Are you able to hear me? It would appear as if we're having some difficulty with his audio. But if you can hear me, I wanted to ask you about Chibok, where all of this started. What is the situation in Chibok now? The report we played before this discussion shows that almost 100 or so of those girls are still in custody, almost more than 8 years on after they were kidnapped. They are still in the custody of insurgents. But in the town itself, the town of Chibok, what's the situation there? Because, again, it's supposed to be a landmark.
No, Chibok now, Chibok is back fully. Chibok is free. People are back to their farms, and we're ensuring that they conduct we're sure of getting bumper harvest this time around. This year alone, we've been able to rescue about 10 Chibok. The 10th Chibok girl was just recovered 2 days ago with her twins baby. She just gave birth about a week ago. So we are making sure that we put all efforts to recover all the girls. I know at the last count, we had about 98 of them. So getting this last one now means there are 97 that are still unaccounted for. But we are sure with our operations, we're going to get those ones we can get out.
My final question, General, will be on looking ahead. Now, we have talked about the situation as it is and as it was, but now looking ahead, if you're to project up at least between now and the handover to the next administration at the end of May next year, a period of about 8 or so months, what are we likely to see in that theater of conflict there? What do you expect will happen?
My expectation is that our operations will ensure that we diminish their capabilities to such an extent that elections can hold successfully. But to achieve that, we need to do a lot. And remember, I told you the last time that the kinetic effort is just 25%. The non-kinetic effort is 75%, which means we have to have the government presence, provision of infrastructure, all these other aspects, everybody playing his own role to make it possible.
Well, we can only hope that that indeed is the case, and that when elections can take place, the people can return to some level of normalcy in their lives. But at the moment, let us thank you, Major General Chris Musa, Theater Commander, Operation Hardin Kai, and best of luck to the troops. Even as we celebrate independence, we know that they're out there guarding us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
We'll take our first break on the program, and when we come back, we'll open up the discussion with the panel, which is joining me here and in our Abuja studios. So please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. So, as promised, let's open up the discussion now. Joining me in our Lagos studios is Ms. Tanwa Ashiru, Security Risk Consultant. Thank you for your time. Welcome.
Thank you.
And in our Abuja studios, we've got 2 gentlemen. First, the former Director of Army Peacekeeping Operations, as well as former Commander of Operation Safe Haven, Major General Anthony Atolagbe, is in our Abuja studios. Good evening, General. Thank you for your time.
Good evening, Nigeria. Happy independence.
Sitting beside him is Dr. Kabir Adamu, Security Risk Management and Intelligence Solutions Consultant. He's also the founder and managing director of Beacon Consulting. Dr. Adamu, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ladi, and happy Independence Anniversary.
Same to all of you. Let me start. The ladies first is what we are told. So let's start off in Lagos with Ms. Ashu. Ms. Ashu, first we listened to the report, which tended to highlight a couple of things. Then we listened to the president, who also highlighted a couple of things. And then we listened to General Musa, who also highlighted a different set of things. Does this, in fact, bring to light the complication or the complicated situation with Nigeria's security today?
Awesome, thank you. And that's a great question. We tell people all the time that the security challenges we're having is multifaceted, which means there are different reasons why we're going through this right now. So the solutions also have to be multifaceted. But I actually want to start off with some of the good. If we're looking at Nigeria at 60 and then 61, now we're 62 years old, what are some of the good things that have happened in the security space? So first of all, like we saw, there's been an increase in funding. That's almost 3 times what it was 7 years ago. So that's good. Also, the purchases of new equipment, that has been helpful. In fact, we've seen as well in the Northeast, like the General said, a lot of attacks have reduced. For those of us who track the data, who are looking at the trends and the patterns, that's actually very good as well. And also, I can't negate the maritime space as well. There's practically almost no maritime attacks that we've been seeing, at least in the last year. So there's been a lot of investment. You can see the government is trying to make an effort. Now, on the bad side, though, we've seen the bandits, from where they started to now, have evolved, and they're now more sophisticated. They're taking on not just helpless students or helpless communities, but now taking on the military as well directly. Their equipment are even more sophisticated now these days. We've also seen this same Boko Haram, or the terrorists at least, who used to operate in the Northeast, now spread to other parts of Nigeria. So at least they've claimed attacks that we know of in the Northwest and also in the North Central, places like Niger State, Kogi. I mean, it's very scary things going on there. Finally, also, oil theft has increased significantly. And also in the Southeast, we're still dealing with this issue of stay at home. People still get attacked if they're just trying to go about their regular days. So cultism, so a lot of these things still persist. And what that tells me is that the strategy perhaps needs to change a little bit. And going forward, I hope this is one area that the government will be open to. How do we start looking at decentralizing security? I say that because one other major trend we've been seeing are the state governors stepping up and saying, you know what, we're tired of waiting for federal. We're going to start taking matters into our own hands and start setting up our own security architecture. And so that just tells us that, look, perhaps the structure we have is not as effective. The security challenges are local, and so let's start looking at how we can tackle them on the local level.
Before I go to Abuja and my guests there, we've got a studio audience here. That's apart from those who are joining us on the various platforms. There are people who are actually here in the Lagos studio. There they are. Of course, they're listening to all of this. And in the course of the program, we hope, if we have the time, to be able to get some feedback from them. But thank you all for being here this evening. Now, let me go to Abuja, where the General and Dr. Adamu are. Let me start with you, General Atolagbe. The Army, in particular, has come in for criticism given the security challenges that we are faced with, and because the Army is front and center. But there are those who have argued that the Army should not be front and center in local security challenges. The Army is supposed to be defending the national borders. But the situation is what has brought in the Army. With what Ms. Ashiru said about improved infrastructure in terms of equipment and possibly welfare that we've heard of as well, has that been a good or a bad thing if you look at it from the background that we were coming?
Thank you, Ashiru. If we look back from where this government came in from, we will realize that there were a lot of problems when they came in. We had bombings, several attacks across the entire horizon. From my own understanding of what has happened in the last 2 years, I take it that there is no body that has a kind of life to live that does not experience some level of challenges. As human beings, during the period of our growth up to adulthood, and perhaps to the end of our time, we keep facing one problem or the other, even though there will be some hours of happiness and so on. So it is with the life of a government and of a nation. Those who were at the helm of affairs, well, we had been considering issues that had to do with contemporary challenges. And some of us asked then that, if we talk about contemporary challenges, what about future challenges? And this is what is started to play out now. What is playing out is that there are other new problems that are emerging. We were having bombings before, now it has graduated to kidnapping. There were no problems on the northwestern part of Nigeria, now there are problems on the northwest. So we needed to have done a kind of comprehensive assessment of the entire situation, pick from whatever is going on in other countries and see how we can relate with what is happening here. So what is now playing out is that it's taking us, based on these challenges, we needed to start, doing reviews. And in the process of doing these reviews, what does it entail? We need to do some evaluation and see what are these problems. Are the equipments we are having, are they enough? Are they adequate to take care of these problems? And those were the ones that created some gaps. Well, today, the story is getting improved or getting better. I would want to say that from the perspective of considering the issues of the welfare of soldiers, the operations itself, the logistics, as well as other platforms that are provided for the troops to fight. Things are getting better now because of some of these reviews that have been done. And these reviews are giving reason to the government to embark on procurement of these platforms like the aircraft and those tanks we saw earlier. So, and I think this is what is giving us the results that we are getting. What is more, aside from the operations that were being conducted before, we are now seeing that, yes, we had the challenges coming from other areas. So, instead of us to look at it from the fact that perhaps it's not easy for us we don't have enough troops to go to some areas because the challenges were just beginning to emerge. No. Now, we are pulling all the resources together. We are engaging on all the other fronts, and we are hearing that at most of the conflict environments, things are getting improved. And
Let me put you on pause, General. Let me put you on pause, General, and ask. Let me put you on pause, General, and ask Dr. Adamu this. There are those who said that we expected too much to start off with, and that when you are faced with insurgency of the type that we are faced with now, and we were faced with when the administration came to power in 2015, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And that in the course of that marathon, so many things would happen. They point to the example of the United States in Afghanistan, and that in spite of spending 20 years there, it left, and those that it overthrew are now back in power, in spite of all the money and all the equipment and everything. That's all. Was it that we didn't understand the nature of what we are confronting, even now, that we don't understand the nature of it, and that's why our attempts to tackle it have fallen short from time to time?
Thank you, Ladi, and once again, happy Independence anniversary. There is some truth to that assertion. I'm of the opinion that as a country, we haven't been able to be truthful to ourselves in disaggregating the challenges that confront us. When we carry on with the same old practice, expecting different results, then frankly, it's either we're not being truthful to ourselves, or there's some semblance of mischief actually involved. And what do I mean? We realized that the involvement of the military, as an example, in the political space was not what we wanted. And so we embraced democracy. And thank God, we're over 20 years into the Fourth Republic. But how much of the changes of our laws have we made to democratize the security space, to make that security space accountable to the civilian component, to us as Nigerians? Very little. And it is that component that I would actually commend this administration. More than any other administration within these 20+ years of the Fourth Republic, this administration has looked into the laws setting up most of these organizations and has attempted to revise those laws and democratize them. So as an example, the Police Act, it was reviewed, and a new act was passed in 2021. Several components of the laws establishing the several other security organizations have been looked at. But again, it is work in progress. The second part of that is the inability to implement even this reviewed acts or laws that set up this organization. So the Police Act that was reviewed, we've seen very little of the implementation. I would always want to talk about the revised National Security Strategy. It's a beautiful document. Any Nigerian who picks that document, in fact, most of our international partners who pick that document are happy about its promises. We were told in that document that there will be a shift, a paradigm shift in security from a state-centered approach to security to a citizen-centered approach to security. Unfortunately, since 2019, when that document was launched, we haven't seen much in terms of the implementation of the promises within that document. The various ministries, departments, and agencies that were supposed to pick from that strategy and create operational documents that would align into that document. We haven't seen that yet. So when my co-discussant talked about contemporary challenges and future challenges, that document actually envisaged it. It talked about things like unmanned aerial vehicles that could be used to launch attacks. It talked about food security, health security, and how to achieve that. So in summary, our expectations, I do not think as a Nigerian, if I'm expecting to be secured, my expectations are too much. No. However, should we judge the performances of this administration within the 7 years that it has lasted on the basis of that expectation to be secured? I think it should be measured in the sense that it inherited several challenges. It has attempted to address some of them. In certain areas, it's been very successful. And in some of the areas, like what I pointed, there is more should have been done, especially in the implementation of some of the revised act that it did.
Let me come back to Lagos and Ms. Ashiru. The President, General General Buhari, had said upon assumption that he was going to tackle this issue of security. But as he admitted earlier on today, as they were tackling, by the mere act of tackling, newer ones were coming up. And that wasn't helped by some of the other things that are particularly Nigerian, including the things that we've mentioned. But if we're now looking ahead, because he's on his way out, and he, at every opportunity he said, you know, he's happy to go, he's willing to go, and someone else should come and give this a try. Now, that someone else now, in the political space, we don't hear much about specifics about how they intend to tackle this, at least not yet. Maybe we will hear in the course of the campaigns, but we haven't yet. What are if you were to identify 3 key things that such a person or such persons, either at the presidential or at the governorship level, should be looking at, given what you know, those of you who are tracking the trends and who are tracking the data, what would those be?
Okay, so number one thing I would say is we need to be more data-driven and using intelligence to move forward. And let me explain what that means. Each time an incident occurs, you can take that information, collate it somewhere, and what that does is it tells you what the trends are. It tells you where to look and what you're looking out for. Let me give you an example. You know, if we're looking at drug data, for example, where we keep complaining there's drug issues that we have with our youth, just by mere analyzing the data that NDLEA has, they can figure out, okay, these are the particular states where we're having or seeing this specific drug. We're seeing more meth or more cocaine in this area. We can tackle those youths in that area based on this. And that's what being data-driven does. You know, I always use this example with road accidents. I tell people all the time that road accidents are actually the #1 cause of fatalities in Nigeria. So if that's the case, if you're gathering that data, you should be able to say the exact road, the exact junction where these accidents tend to occur. And then you can put measures in place, put the speed bumps, put the signage, and all those things you need to do. So we need to really do that going forward, especially even in the military as well. When you're using intelligence to move, then you know exactly where you're going. You know what the terrain will be like. You know, the general earlier mentioned about, you know, the terrain, the weather. We hear this every single year. It's going to rain every single year. You know, if specific
and
parts
it's something we have to bear in mind.
Exactly, and use that going forward. So that's #1, is intelligence and data-driven. The second thing I'm also going to say is about unity. A lot of what we're dealing with right now, and, you know, and I hate to say it, but this current administration didn't do a lot to unify Nigeria. In fact, there were more cracks and more division in this last couple of years than we've seen in the history of our nation. So whoever is coming in really needs to take this on board. I say this because there are over 250 different ethnic groups. We grew up here. Today is Independence Day. We grew up learning, oh, Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba. So what about the remaining 247? So there are a lot of minority voices that are not being heard. And this is an issue. I say that now, if you think of, I remember seeing an interview with Bello Turji, one of the notorious bandits in the Northwest. And Bello said that one of the reasons why he started this banditry thing that he was doing was that his father, he saw his father have issues with farmers herders. And instead of the police to help resolve it, they kept extorting him. Bello says, I saw our family go from 200 cows to 2. From that, he stopped believing in the system. Their voices were not heard. They took up guns and started taking matters into their own hands. We see this everywhere, all over the country. So there's a lot of dialogue that also needs to happen as well going forward. And then the third area that I really want us to think about, you mentioned it earlier. We keep talking about the military. Look, with what we're seeing with Ukraine and Russia, if any country decides to invade, God forbid, invade Nigeria right now, who's going to protect us? If we're weighing down the military on all sorts of internal issues that we're having, who is going to solve this issue? We need to start empowering all the other civil policing agencies we have, the NSCDC. You know, in a lot of the videos that you showed, the earlier clips, we didn't see any mention of them. And, you know, and all these agencies also have intelligence units within them. They all need to start collaborating. The intelligence community, which means all the intelligence units across all the military, paramilitary, and the police departments, all need to start speaking with each other. So whoever it is that's coming in has a tall order.
Oh, a lot of work, and that's just the part that you're talking about. Now, let me go to Dr. Adamu in our Abuja studios. Dr. Adamu, you and I have spoken about this down the years severally, the issue of intelligence, because at the end of the day, people talk about intelligence being central to all of this. You can't know what you're faced with, or you can't tackle what you're faced with if you are not able to assess it and know what the best way is to go about it. Nigeria has several intelligence agencies at the federal and at other levels. There are some that are so top secret, I think only maybe 50 people in the country know about their existence, but they are there. And so the question that one asks all the time is, if we have this many agencies working on intelligence, how come we are not able to predict where the bad guys are going to strike and be better prepared to receive them when they eventually show up?
So I think there's an assumption there that we're not able to predict. What if we're able to predict and we still allow them to come and attack? It sounds ridiculous,
Right. General Atolagbe, as a military man, you mostly are very careful with what you say, especially when you are in the military or even when you are on the reserve list, as we are told. But I must also ask that within the military, from inside the military, that we have heard that they themselves would like some things, and that the assumption must not be made that everything is honky-dory because they are command and control organizations. So again, I ask you the question that I've asked my other two panelists, which is that from the angle of the military, particularly the army, which is the one which is really spread thin. The last I checked, the army was in 33 states of the Federation under various operations and theater commands and so on. What is it that an incoming administration can put in place to help ensure the better effectiveness of Nigeria's army?
Okay. I had served in the military, and I had commanded both at the UN and as well as in Nigeria. When you go out there, you are possibly given almost everything to work with. But back here, we make do with what is available, and we try as much as possible to make sure that with what is available, we are able to achieve results. Beyond the call of duty, sometimes you may need to take some other measures, so that you make things to work within your command. And what are we saying here? There are instances where you are working in an environment and you find out that perhaps all the equipment that you require are not there. The Army has what we call order of battle, in which all the equipment that we are supposed to be given are listed there. But due to paucity of funds and other commitments of governments in other areas, it's a little difficult for them to be able to meet all this. I used to think, and perhaps if we were given a voice, that if there was a commitment on the part of government, regardless of which one is there, perhaps you draw a long-term plan to equip the system, then it will be easy for us to get those necessary equipment that will require, and then the troops will be able to get more results from their operations. So if a government like this one that has taken all these steps that has been taken now, perhaps before they go out, they can draw a long-term plan and say, okay, we need to achieve this level of equipping by so year. We need to achieve this level of equipping by another year. Then we will be sure that, yes, this equipment will come in, and then we'll be able to meet the level of equipment that is required to face the challenges that we are facing and the ones that we are likely to face in the future. And these are very key areas that perhaps people need to look into, not just haphazardly needing equipment and then we go and start looking for how to get money, but if these things are drawn and kept for other, even if it's another government comes in and they are made to key into it, you just see everything is being done in a very easy and appropriate manner.
That's it. I'm told, of course, that we are slowly running out of time, so my guests are going to have two more minutes. But those 2 minutes, I want to use them to address another thing that has assumed a larger-than-life dimension when we talk about security challenges. And this one has to do with our pocket. And I'm talking about crude oil theft, which is a security challenge, which is now affecting the country. Let me start, in this case, with Dr. Adamu in our Abuja studios. Dr. Adamu, we've heard so much about the security challenges in terms of all these other aspects that we've talked about. But the case of crude oil theft has been low-lying, and suddenly it has now emerged from inside the water out as a monster on its own. What are we supposed to do to tackle that? We've talked about what is going on. What are we going to do to tackle it?
I think I'll just mention 2 words, honestly. Accountability. Accountability.
On the part of who? Accountability on the part of who?
We need to hold them. So that's what I'm trying to explain. Hold the security departments that are in that region that have responsibility accountable. It's unfathomable, really, for me to wake up and see that we have checked that responsibility and we're actually giving that responsibility to a private individual. The budget that we pass and that the monies that are allocated to these organizations, what happened to them? The resources that are at their disposal, what are they using those resources for? When this matter is of such significance to our national existence, to our economy, and yet we're allowing it to continue. Frankly, it's ridiculous. The quantity that we're discussing are not quantities that you put in a drum or a quantity that you put even in a tanker. We're talking of quantities that are moved at such level that it's embarrassing for me to, as a Nigerian, to even discuss it with members of the international community. So again, accountability. The security departments that are in that region that have responsibility for ensuring, especially the protection of our maritime border, I would hold them responsible. I know there are several elements of this, including, for instance, what has been called official bunkering. But if we introduce accountability and someone is held accountable for what he has been asked to do, all of this will come to an end.
General Atolagbe, what do you make of this? I mean, you've commanded Operation Safe Haven, even though it's not in an oil-producing area, but the issue of local communities and complicity with economic crimes is something that happens right across the country, except that this one is in the case of crude oil.
Well, in some research work that have been done, that aspect is referred to as the socio-political problem. And there are other areas which has to do with economy, as well as the aspect of price variation in the crude oil market. And these are some of the reasons responsible for COT, that's crude oil theft. And what is possible, what is happening now is that, first, the aspect has been brought to light. And it means something urgent needs to be done about it. And trusting this government, we're sure that now that this thing has come before everybody's eyes, because when you are stealing something, it's done, I mean, perhaps through some close and sharp movement and cutting corners. But now that it has come to the knowledge of everybody that certain things of this nature are going on, I'm sure government is going to make effort. There's a native report, sometimes before this government came in, which spelled out how to prevent COT. And perhaps if something can be done, perhaps they can lay hand on this kind of document. They wrote about how each liter of crude that is pumped out of this country, both incoming and outflow, is accounted for using some technology. And if we can key into some of these areas, we may not be able to stop everything in an absolute manner, but perhaps to some reasonable extent, we'll be able to curtail and get some good results from the actions that we'll be taking.
Ms. Ashiru, you have the final word on both this issue and on the segment, so
okay,
wrap it up for us.
Awesome. I'm going to tell you a very quick story about an incident that happened. So it happened in Katsina. Illegal miners were going to mine a gold area, an area that they thought had gold deposits. And they got official government security personnel to come and protect them.
Illegal miners with official government security.
Thank you. Okay. I'm glad you picked that up. So now they paid each one of the government official security force 500,000 naira each. When they mined it, they found huge deposits of gold. And the security forces personnel came and said, hey, listen, you're going to share this gold though equally. The illegal miner said, no, we've already paid you 500K. There's no way. And they said, no, it's not going to happen. And a shootout then happened. 2 of the official government security forces personnel dead, 7 of the miners dead. What am I saying here? I can take this exact scenario and just plug it right in the Niger Delta, in these areas that have illegal bunkering. You've seen what those sites look like. If you were flying a helicopter or any kind of air asset, there's no way you can miss where this illegal bunkering is taking place. Or there's no way you can miss the assets that are taking the crude oil, where the crude oil theft is going to be.
So what you're talking about essentially is complicity.
Absolutely. And until we check that, we're going to keep having this issue with our resources in the country.
Indeed. So much to chew, so much to talk about, so much to take a look at, both for the current government and incoming government. One can only hope that some of what has been said by my panel this evening is being noted down for action, both by the outgoing government and by those who are preparing to take the reins next year. Let me thank Ms. Ashiru and Dr. Kabir Adamu and Major General Atolagbe in our Abuja studios for your time this evening on this segment. Thank you so much for coming, and happy Independence Anniversary. That's my studio audience. Thank you for that. We'll take a break and we'll come back. When we come back, we're going to feed this discussion from crude oil theft and how that, amongst others, is affecting our economic output. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying with us. Welcome back to the program. As I was saying before the break, the security challenges facing the nation naturally feed into the state of the economy, which is our next port of call. Of course, if we've had so much insecurity over the last couple of years, 2 recessions would not come as a big surprise. High interest and inflation rates, declining productivity and purchasing power, high debt figures for all strata of government and even the private and informal economy all make for a dire situation for Nigeria at 62. We'll be looking at this and trying to profile ways forward, both for this government and the government expected to succeed it next year. So in that case, I've been joined in the studios here by 3 gentlemen, 3 economists of repute. Let me start, of course, with Mr. Bismarck Rewane, Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Rewane, of course, is also a member of the Presidential Economic Team. On this side, we have Dr. Biodo Adedipe, Principal Partner, B. Adedipe and Associates. Thank you for your time. Thank you and welcome. And on the other side, of course, you do know that Mr. Alaje is one of our regulars on our various business platforms. Mr. Paul Alaje is economist. Thank you so much. Welcome to the program.
Much,
so, let's look at this. I want to start off with Mr. Rwane. Set the stage for us. Where are we as of today? Is it really as dire as many people say it is?
You start off with the word dire. I
Yes.
don't think, but facts are facts. The reality is that Nigeria is 62 years old, and if Nigeria was a human being, the average life expectancy of a Nigerian is 55, so Nigeria would have expired, right? So 1. 2, they say a fool at 40 is really
A fool forever.
So I don't think that's the situation. But basically what we see are some good things and some not so great things. But basically, the slides will show you that Nigeria is behaving like a toddler at 62. And if you're a toddler at 62, then you need to do some things. The last thing you want to do is to start wearing diapers at 62. So where were we in 1960, 62 years ago? So 62 years ago, the life expectancy was actually 39 years, 36 years actually. And the currency was 71 cents to $1.
Which meant our currency was stronger.
Yeah, 71 cents, 71 kobo to $1. Sorry, I use the word cents. The literacy rate was 55%. And the real GDP growth was 0.19. Fast forward 62 years later, Nigeria's growth is 2.91, which is good. The GDP per capita has gone from $92 a head to $2,293. But what $92 could buy in 1960, you can't even buy with if you adjust for inflation. Well, the reality is that let us compare ourselves. We're a colonial country that time. 1 naira was one. There was no naira. There was a pound, right. Nigerian pound. Population was 45 million. Now we're 216 million. Life expectancy, as I said, was 40 years, 39.9. Now it's 55 years. Great. Now, but at that same time, we had other countries like us. China, for example, was very clear. China had a GDP size of $59 billion. We had $4 billion. The entire country had $4 billion. That was the GDP of Nigeria in 1960. Malaysia had $1.92 billion. Singapore had less than $1 billion. Go forward 62 years. Singapore, the income per head in Nigeria has gone from $93 to $2,225. China has gone from $90. The Chinese income per capita was $90, $90 for one person a year. It's now $10,000. Malaysia had $235. Malaysia has gone to $10,000. And Singapore, which had $428, now has $60,000. So compared to our peers, it's as if we just went, it's been lights out for Nigeria. Now, but there's some great things. Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa, but declining. 26th largest in the world. 4 of the 20 fastest growing cities in the world are in Nigeria, and they are Nnewi, Abuja, Uyo, and Port Harcourt. 5th largest agricultural output, $84 billion.
A number of people will be surprised that those fastest growing cities you mentioned did not include some usual suspects.
No. The fastest growing doesn't mean they're a huge population, but
fastest growing, yeah.
Now, second largest producer of roots and tubers, yams, after China, 115 million tons a year. 5th largest producer of vegetables in the world, 16.4 million tons. I say you need to check that out. 2nd largest producer of tomatoes in Africa, and 14th largest in the world. 6th largest diaspora remittances back into the country, $24 billion. And 7th highest fertility rate in the world amongst our women. 17th lowest median age, 18.1. But it's been a story of missed opportunities. An infant giant. Oil boom turned oil curse. Nigeria has underperformed in every respect of almost every economic indicator due to structural defects, weak institutions, and compromised leaders. So, what next? The truth is that, the good news is that the economy, like the 4 different scenarios, will either regress completely, right? conflict, we either implode, second option. 3, status quo, just muddle through.
Just keep.
And 4th option, which is you break through and become a great nation. The probability is that because we are pushed to the wall, we are likely, none of the 3 other options is a plausible scenario. So the chances are, and we hope, that we break through and make some progress, right? But there are 4 categories of Nigerians. There are rural survivors, and these are 38% of the population. The rural people, Agric and all of that, they are just survivors. They are barely above water. Then you have urban survivors, another 50%. So 88% of the people are survivors, just barely.
Managing to eke out a living.
Then there's a dwindling middle class, which is about 10%. And then there's sophisticated elites who use private jets and everything, 2%. So because of this income inequality, because of this opportunity inequality, because of this oppression of those who have as against those who do not have, and they say if you don't have, you can't get, and if you can't get, you can't have, right? So now it reflects itself in this next slide, which tells you that in the last year, the price of new yam has gone from 1,000 to 1,500, up 50%. A bag of rice, in spite of all the pyramids and all of that, has gone from 16,000 to 35,000 as of today. Okay? Of course, cooking gas has gone all the way to 10,500. Gari has gone from 6,500 to 15,000, up 130%. Cement has gone from 2,550 to 4,200. That's fair. And your rent has gone from 500,000, if you're in the middle, up to 1.2 million. So, well, next is the fact that you will have in 2023, 2024, the indicators seem to be looking green. In other words, real GDP is going to go from the current level to about 3.8% in 2024. Income per head will go slightly, marginally up to 2,330. Inflation, which is now at 20.54, is likely to decline to 13.8 next year and down to 12.3 the following year. The exchange rate, which is on its own 7.45 today, is likely to appreciate towards, hopefully, to about 6.80, 6.20 at that time because of policies that will be introduced. Life expectancy, 59 years, and your literacy rate will increase. So, why? New government, new administration, new people, new policies, new promises. Policies, promises. All candidates are pro-business, business-friendly policies, new direction, debt rescheduling is inevitable, and managed floating rate of the Naira is almost inevitable. Privatization of state enterprises, and so open market economy, real GDP increase, Naira will appreciate, increased investment flows, unemployment will likely reduce. So all things being equal, touch wood, better days ahead. Touch wood.
Touch wood. Now, I'm very happy. Thank you very much, Mr. Awane, for setting that. Now, to both Mr. Alaji and Dr. Adedikpe, let's look at what he said a bit. Those who are coming, a lot of those I've spoken to, and I want 2 of you to take this. Those I've spoken to say that not only is it that they are not yet talking about the economy, beyond we'll create jobs, we'll build houses, we'll build roads, which everybody says. But that they don't seem to be aware of what they will be taking over. Someone pointed out to me yesterday that the head of service, either in annoyance or in a fit of, admitted that the federal government had been borrowing for quite a while to pay salaries. So that money is going down a hole because if it's a salary payment, it's not coming back. Okay? And that is responsible for the widening of the debt portfolio. And that's the federal government. You can imagine what's going on at the states. So I want you to take a look at what Mr. Awane has said vis-a-vis what the incoming people who are now beginning to beat the drums of campaign will be faced with, and we hope that they will be listening as you speak. Let me start with you, Dr. Adedikpe.
All right, thank you so very much, and happy Independence Anniversary, everybody. Now, that was a very, very encouraging scenario that Mr. Arewani painted. And of course, I align with those expectations because of the work I've been doing in that area as well. Now, one critical thing that I will expect the frontline contenders for that office to start with is a vision for the economy. And I'm looking at that not about the 10 or 4 years, but a vision that talks about what you want to make of this economy in the next 10 years, which means you must look beyond your own time in the office. And that vision also should be compelling enough for Nigerians to also understand it, which means it's not about casting the vision, but also communicating it well, so we know where you are going. That would be the starting point. So that also will look at what type of economy do we want? Is it going to be export-led growth we are going to pursue? Or are we looking inwards where we say, look, a bill of 1.889 trillion naira monthly, January to June this year, we want to work on that and see how we reduce that bill. Or you are looking at unemployment. What creative approach do you want to introduce? It's not enough to say, okay, in the next 10 years, we're going to create 100 million jobs and whatever. But specifics, how will that be done? So, and in such a way that the rest of us can relate with it.
Can measure it, can follow it.
Very important. Now, that means that whatever you tell us you want to do and want to achieve, as you said earlier, promises, okay, they must be measurable. And that means we can hold you accountable. It also means that periodically you want to bring the scorecard to Nigerians, and then we can say, okay, we are on the right trajectory concerning what the promise does. That is what leadership is about. So I'm waiting to hear them say concrete things in that direction. Specifics. Now we know Nigeria today, like many other countries anyway, is facing currency crisis. There's also the crisis of inflation, which is global anyway. But I want to hear specifics. What will your own administration do about that if you come into office?
Mr. Raji, our own situation is different because what Dr. Adedipe has said now about, the global community, various countries faced with inflation and so on, we find that many of them are able to begin to tackle this because they have something which Nigeria is mostly not having, which is that we don't seem to have a productive base. We are not producing anything, and therefore we are left at the whims and caprices of the economic winds of demand and supply elsewhere. I mean, the war is on in Ukraine, so bread has become expensive in Nigeria, even though Nigeria is neither supporting Ukraine nor Russia and so on. But, we are already bearing the brunt. These are the things that people tell me. They can't buy Indomie anymore because the price of pasta has gone up because, you have that. Granite oil. And so these are the people at the base, what Mr. Arewani referred to as the rural and urban survivors. So, again, I ask you the question I asked Dr. Adedipe. So when people are now, telling you, vote for me next May, I will build roads and so on. How do I live till next May, to be able to begin to see some of these things?
Thank you so very much. Happy independence to all of us that are Nigerians. What is missing in our economy is faith. We all have lost faith in the economy. Many people graduated from Nigeria University, many doctors. You saw the numbers 2 years ago when the Medical Association in Nigeria were telling the Minister of Labor that more doctors are leaving Nigeria. And the minister said, well, that is good. You see, those that are leading us and those of us that are citizens must show example, especially our leaders. When you lose faith in something, you don't put your mind into it. And it shows by where you spend your money. Nigerian economy is struggling today because we really don't believe in it. And economists cannot lie. It will show by the numbers. Let's look at the numbers. Central Bank of Nigeria shared this year that we spent $40 billion to import both education and health. About $28 billion is what we spent on importing education. Meanwhile, average of $1 billion per annum is what we have spent to bring in health, that is to import health. These are things that in 1960, there was hope. We saw University Teaching Hospital in Ibadan. And we saw some things that leaders of those days were trying to put in place so that we will not continue to deplete our foreign exchange. But other than continuing in that process, we have seen military intervene, and now, should I say, civilian intervention. Because looking at the difference is really not there. If I ask today, let's sample opinion, and for that are watching us around the world that are Nigerians. If America say there is free visa, you can stay for 5 years, how many Nigerians will still remain in Nigeria? How many people will love to travel if we say visa is now free? So the man coming, I've seen 3 or 4 or 5 contenders. How will they restore faith in this nation that will make us proud that we are Nigeria? And faith can be measured. It's not religious faith. If I hold 1,000 naira today, how will I be guaranteed that what 1,000 naira we buy today, I will still be able to use it to buy the same thing tomorrow? Because Nigeria is being battered on 2 sides. One on inflation, over 20%, which means your 1,000 naira last year automatically is now less than 800 naira in terms of what it can buy. The second one, which is even worse, is exchange rate. By the way, each time we say we devalue, Central Bank of Nigeria had devalued the naira, on official rate. And what we saw, by February this year, I mean last year, was that 1 trillion naira was added to the debt profile of Nigeria. Exactly February, when the policy was made. And the meaning, we did not borrow any money. But because we now need more naira, because this economy is naira, to pay back the dollar. So the man coming must be able to explain in clear terms, what are you going to do to exchange rate? What would you do with subsidy? These are topics that politicians don't want to touch, but you must discuss it.
Yeah, but part of the reason why they don't want to touch is because, as one of them had told me, Nigerians don't want to hear.
Not that Nigerians don't want to hear.
Let me explain, because when you say it like this, there are people who have said it like that, and that is that, oh yeah, you want to talk about subsidy, you want to talk about removing some of these other bottlenecks and so on. But the minute you do so, there are reactions. The people shut down the country, shut down the economy. So what you are trying to solve, you haven't quite solved. But then you are now faced with additional challenges which are at the very beginning of what you are trying to solve. So, I mean, if you talk about, I know how much political kickback some of those you are mentioning got when they said, yes, we will look at that issue of removing the subsidy. They haven't actually said they will remove it. But quite a number of the reactions they got were that we are waiting.
Just look at our budget 2022 and remove 5 or 6 trillion that will be spent on subsidy out of that budget. And ask me, you understand what the minister said when she mentioned that what we generated in revenue in Q1, that's first quarter, was not sufficient to service debt. But we would spend about 5 to 6 or 7 trillion, depending on what the figure will be at the end of the year, and remove that from what has been budgeted for. And let us know, can that money truly help us in the path of growth in the real sense of it? So anyone coming must tell us, what exactly would you do? And not just what, how would you do what you claim? So we have the issue of subsidy. We also have some issues people don't want to talk about. But at the end of the day, they come back hurting us big time.
Mr. Rwade, you most recently, even as we speak now, you are able to see some of the political headwinds that people talk about when they talk about the economy as not being a simply economic matter. And that therefore, even though facts don't lie, the data supports a particular thing, but that there are always other considerations, including vested interests, which may or may not be the ones who put you in the position where you are the one making the decision in the first place, who will say, sorry, this you can't touch, that you can't touch. How do you go about that?
I think first and foremost, this is not a manifesto, a political platform. So I don't think we are here to talk about what the new president, because we're talking about 62 years of a country. Therefore, it also transcends many generations and many
yeah, but we're also looking at what are the things that are preventing us from being able to go this far.
There are bottlenecks, but the reality is that what are the solutions? And some of those solutions will go beyond today, tomorrow. And the reason why I painted a picture of cautious, very cautious optimism was that involuntary change in Nigeria has been more effective than voluntary change. Nigerians do things when they have to do it, not when they want to do it. Okay? So we are at the point now where we can no longer continue the way it is. All the parameters have shown that it is no longer sustainable or tenable. In other words, your debt problem, your multidimensional poverty, your lack of opportunity, the growing irrelevance of OPEC and the obsolescence of oil, and the fact that your oil production, the main oil production has become the fringe, and the fringe has become the main. That, in other words, oil theft is more than the oil production. Right? So the lunatics have taken over the asylum, right? And that is exactly where we are. So what steps do we have to take immediately? One, you've got to accept the fact that the exchange rate has to be liberalized. Because in any case, everything that is being priced today, from tomatoes to oranges to yams and everything, is being priced with that exchange rate in mind, because exchange rate, 76% of the inflation rate in Nigeria, causative factor, comes from the exchange rate. So is it the exchange rate that is causing inflation, or is it inflation that is causing exchange rate? That's a different theory altogether. Now, so when you now know that, you have to do this. You have to reschedule and restructure your debt profile, because once you push out the debt, principal and interest payments over a longer period and refinance them with more expensive, you will have some breathing room to invest in productive and increase total factor productivity and labor productivity. When you do those things, and before you can do any rescheduling, you have to agree terms with your creditors. And those terms are not going to be easy. Nobody's going to give you money. You can't go. Some people went to New York recently talking about debt forgiveness, but all of them went in private jets. And they went in private jets and Rolls Royce. You don't go there to your creditors to show ostentatious, luxurious living. You go there humble because you have learned from the fact that he who goes a borrowing will end up going a sorrowing. So that is the situation. So what do we do now? Reschedule the debt, address the productive sector, and the commodity that is in shortest supply in this country today is sincerity. Nobody is sincere. People say what they don't believe and want everybody to believe them. They themselves do not believe it. So policymakers, politicians are all compromised, totally and completely compromised. And once that has been determined and understood by the markets, then you have a crisis of confidence. What you have today on your currency and everything is a crisis of confidence. So what do we do? Now, there are some little shoots of excellence. And I'll take Edo State, for example. Edo State is investing significant amount of money on tourism. This is a new dimension. Tourism does not thrive in where there's insecurity, but you've got to come against it brutally and frontally. So if you do that and raise the bar, medical tourism, things that are happening, importing the doctors to do telemedicine and all of that, those things can actually shift the Burna Boy, Wizkid and others, those diaspora flows. Because diaspora flows and what is coming from Nollywood and others is being what has kept this currency afloat. Now that with all your restrictions, those monies are being diverted, you can now see it in a completely misaligned currency. And that misaligned currency is causing inflation. And inflation is legislation, taxation without legislation. So we have to be very specific. Reschedule the debt, invest in those other areas, right? And be sincere, be truthful. We have spent half of our time and all our resources lying to ourselves and lying to the people, period.
Now, Dr. Didikbe, when Mr. Iwane was talking, it occurs to me that a lot of the decisions that are to be made, even on the basis of the things that he's talked about, reschedule the debt, tackle, some of the themes that have thrown our currency out of gear and so on. All of this would require some painful decision making. Yeah. They require some painful decision making. And if you look internationally, most countries don't do that except they are faced with no choice, which is why he talked about being at the wall. Yeah. At the wall. Now, in your own thinking, in addition to what he has said, if we are to break it even further down, because it's not only those at the national level, although I mean they are probably the most important, but at other levels, what is the situation?
Right. Thank you so very much for that. Now, when you come to subnational level, we have a bigger problem on our hands. Because number one, most of them don't plan, and then the commitment to doing what is right for the economy at the subnational level is lacking. So for me then, the tone is set at the top. And the way I see this is, I always ask this question, what needs to change? I'm not so much so to the idea of, oh, remove subsidy. It doesn't work that way anywhere. Okay? Conceptually, there's nothing wrong with subsidy. But where the problem lies is when you subsidize consumption rather than production. And that is where we need to be pragmatic. Now, if you look at what is happening in Europe as we speak, many governments in Europe are introducing subsidy, okay? But the subsidy is going in the form of tax rebates to the energy producers and suppliers. So in which case, the effect of that subsidy on price is working through the production system and not going to the consumer directly. So it is still there, but the way it is managed and then the direction is key. That's one. Now, secondly, this issue of currency, because the reality is that whatever happens to the Naira exchange value affects everything, okay? And I will bring three things into this conversation. Some 35 years ago, I was in a conversation, and the argument was that should the Naira be floated, should we also consider banning some imports? And then, of course, I recollect vividly the position of the World Bank then was that Nigeria should not ban the importation of any item, but we can put a tariff as high as 500%. And I replied then that a tariff of 500% will make whatever you import so expensive, and I guarantee you, by the attitude of the regular Nigerian, he will still buy it. If only to show that he can afford it.
And he's different from everybody else.
And you can't afford it. He will buy it.
It's not fair.
So, and I used 3 examples then. And I asked the question, what has Nigeria to do with importing safety matches, toothpicks, and walking sticks? I used those 3 examples 35 years ago. Now, 20 years ago, that was November 2002, what Mr. Rwani said came up at the Central Bank's Monetary Policy Conference. I was given a paper to deliver, and that is looking at the macroeconomic prices, exchange rate, inflation rate, interest rate. Which one should Central Bank focus on? That connects to what Mr. Rwani said. That, and my thesis then was that everything that happens in Nigeria takes a cue from the exchange value of the Naira. The moment Naira loses value, it washes through the price of every commodity. And invariably also, it puts pressure on the central bank in terms of interest rate, management. So, and I said, for that reason, the central bank should give more attention to exchange rate management. So how do we do that? Now, I will also say this. I dressed like this deliberately today. My first choice was to be in suit and tie. But I said, how do I get a message across to Nigerians that where the problem starts with is us, not even the government? And what I mean there simply is this. The average Nigerian has a penchant for imported materials. Because this is a kind of psyche that whatever is imported is superior in quality. That needs to change. We must deliberately begin to consume what is made in Nigeria. And that means those 3 legs of economic activities: production, consumption, exchange. We must deliberately, from this point on, now focus on those.
Mr. Alaje, what Dr. Didipe and Mr. Iwane have pointed out are things that we have wrestled with. At a point, it was FDI that was on everybody's lips, foreign direct investment. And in the course of that foreign direct investment, we had things like portfolio investors. And I remember a young person asking me, what is a portfolio investor? And I don't know if it was correct to be that simplistic to say it's someone with a portfolio. It comes in, invests, and once there's trouble, they are out with their portfolio. They don't keep anything on ground that they, So again, does that then give us the situation where perhaps we were targeting the wrong things, which is the debate about what Mr. Iwane pointed out and what Dr. Didipe has just pointed out, that we were going after the wrong things, and that even now, except that in a conversation like this, some of those things are coming up that we're still not completely sure about what it is that we should be going after.
Well, in the game of football, just before we came here, Mr. Iwane was sharing with us that Arsenal is now topping the table, right, where we were earlier. Nigeria is not using best 11 to manage our economy. We don't have our best 11. And you see, it is what people say, hearsay, what we feel. We are running an economy of impression. This is what we feel should happen. At the end of the day, we will see the numbers. And numbers don't lie. You can ask people. Hunger is a reality. Poverty is a reality. Unemployment is a reality. Inflation is a reality. Devaluation is a reality. People, those who we have entrusted with our livelihood, because nationhood, that means you are living there. It's part of your life. Whatever happens to inflation in Nigeria will affect you, it will affect me. Those that are managing it, that we have surrendered our life, economic life to, our security to, I doubt if it really matters to them. And I will tell you why. When you look at what Naira was, 2014, we were all complaining. What is Naira today? In fact, the gap between official rate and parallel market rate is larger than what it was in 2014. Not that the gap, to be charitable, let's say 430 at official rate, and parallel market rate, let's say 710 or so. 745. Let's say 730. The gap alone is 300. It wasn't 300 in 2014. So, is there really subsidy? What are we subsidizing? Let me explain. If we say that we are subsidizing by 200 naira, for instance, and we are buying at one, it depends on the state, because it's now depending on geopolitical zone. Say we are buying at 190 plus 300. If Naira were to be what it was in 2014, would we say there is subsidy? The answer is no. Because Naira has been so devalued, it has been so emaciated. Meanwhile, people are still earning 30,000 naira. And that is why you see the anger. You see the complaint. You see people talking to you. Things were not what they used to be. Because those that run the economy want quick fixes. And you have heard from Mr. Iwane, you have heard from Doctor. It's not going to be what you do overnight. But the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a vision.
One step.
It starts with one step. The journey of 1,000 miles. What we are not seeing is that step forward, is step backward. The former central bank governor said, we have retrogressed back into many years, what we used to be. Things that were available on our tables in the 80s suddenly have disappeared. The teas, the bread, the size of bread, the kind of life we want to live. But because economic matters, and you cannot lie about it, we can say sweet words, we can campaign and say, the question is, how would you do it? I did an article a number of years ago, especially about import. Nigeria economy has jobs. The truth is that we generate millions of jobs. Unfortunately, the job don't stay with us. You know why? When you import, you take 3 decisions. The first decision you take when you import your suit and my suit and his suit, and even the clothes he wears is imported. It's just that it's sewn in Nigeria.
Yeah, local content.
Even my own is sewn in Nigeria. So that we made it what we call traditional attire does not mean it's made in Nigeria. It's also imported. Yes. But when you import, you take 3 decisions. The first decision you take is that you will deplete your foreign reserve. Central bank will be in trouble. Me say, Emefiele cannot print dollar. And that is why we say that policymakers are not communicating. When we say they are not communicating, we don't mean they are not meeting somewhere in the boardroom, in one office. No. We are saying that fiscal authority, trade authority, and monetary authority, their results we are seeing are not aligning. And this is 62 years. The policy is still not aligning. If it aligns, I don't need to say it. We will see the results. So when you import, you deplete foreign reserve. The second thing is you collect your goods and you'll be happy. But you know the third? The third is the most important. You lose jobs. You give job away to that country. So each time we import, we are telling somebody producing in China, in India, keep your job. We are telling potential job in Nigeria, we are stripping you of the job, that you don't have right to the job. So whatever we import, and you can look at it from our shoes, for women with wig, our human hair that is imported, from lipstick, from clothes, from anything we have. People watching us in their homes, the television they are using to watch us, is it made in Nigeria or imported? The air condition, is it made in Nigeria or imported? The chairs, whatever you have around you, how many can we say we have made in Nigeria? I'm not saying we can make everything in Nigeria, by the way, but I'm saying that there is the competitive cost advantage. We should look at it. We make oil. The least of the advantages should be for us to refine the oil locally. But unfortunately, 50 to 80% of the oil has gone under the ground in the name of oil theft.
Look, Mr. Iwade, so that brings, I'm sorry, that what he said now just brings me back to you. Yes. In the sense that he alluded to the one that, okay, we don't even have to struggle to do, which is the oil. Yes. Okay, so, but even the value addition, all the countries you mentioned that you compared Nigeria to from 1960 to now, incidentally, Malaysia, Singapore, China, okay, who were, some were even less than Nigeria, others were comparable. They're refining. Yes, but today, the Malaysian example, people talk about palm oil and what happened with Nigeria and the issue of palm oil. Yeah. So again, it comes back to what you were referring to or what you were talking about earlier, which is that nobody is going to do it at once. No one administration is going to be able to do it, even assuming they decide that they should do it. In which case, there's need for plan. Yes. But I also remember that we had Vision 2020, okay, which was the most famous one at the time. And at the time when Vision 2020 was on, it seemed as if 2020 was so far away. Yeah. But 2020 is now 2 years behind us. Yeah. Okay, so again, it comes back to the issue of how are we processing these various things. I know that you and Dr. Adedipe and probably Mr. Laji had a role in Vision 2020, maybe not the implementation, but at least in the conceptualization of the document. Again, it's those are unmeetable targets. You just set a target knowing that you're not going to be there to answer it. So, quite frankly, the day a plan is finished, it's already obsolete, right? So, but you have, and nobody even refers to the plan to see how far away we are not. So, again, it's like if you have a school without exams, you know what will happen to the children. So you must have measures to do that. But I think that the point has to be made very clearly that we talked about Nigeria. Nigeria is not a Robinson Crusoe economy. We go across. Exactly what's happening here, happening in Ivory Coast, happening in Ghana, happening in South Africa and all of that. How do we compare to our peers? Are they banning things there and all of that? I think that's all. That's yesterday's thinking. What you have to worry about is how competitive are you? You know, what are the things you're going to produce that you have a competitive advantage or comparative advantage in terms of output and cost? So when you look at that and see where the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is going, where the rules of origin are going, how is Nigeria positioned? We talk about refining. Dangote has invested loads of money in refining, and in another year or so, we will be able to produce things. But let us take a look at what happened to fertilizers. October last year, fertilizer was 5,000 naira a bag in this country. Dangote's fertilizers came on board, 3 million extra tons. What is the price of fertilizer, a bag of fertilizer today?
17,000 naira. And what's happening? The guys are buying the fertilizers and carrying it across the border. Because they are rational economic agents, they know that by selling it across the border, they will get safer and bring the money here and buy things. So to the extent that money is fungible, to the extent that every economic agent is rational and work in his own best interest. So once you make that assumption, and that the markets are efficient by nature, right? You can't fool around and say this exchange rate. No, the exchange rate is telling you a story. If you're not efficient in how you produce, you'll be punished. The British government just announced, you know what happened to the British pound? They were punished, screwed properly.
Yeah.
And they typified and caricatured as zombie economists, right? And what have they done? They've now decided, the reality is that if there's a crisis of confidence in your country, your currency, there's nothing you can do except you change your policies altogether. And I said it from the beginning, that is commodity that is scarce, most scarce in this country today, sincerity. There's a trust deficit. Nobody, even the people who are announcing policies, do not believe what they're announcing. And you can tell when somebody doesn't believe what he's saying, right? So, and that's the reality. Now we've been caught. We are where we are. I don't care what you do. Until you make a fundamental change, nothing will happen. Confidence will not come back. Nobody is going to believe you until you are sincere to yourself. Having said that, that's where I started, starting point. Go to your creditors, get a rescheduling. Be sincere to yourself and say, you are living above your means. So cut it back. Go to the state governments where you said there's a huge lack of capacity, where state government officials are intent in sabotaging even the state projects. Yeah. There's no capacity there. Remember when doing the minimum wage here, how much is your salary? Nobody could come up in the states to say what it is. And if we did not increase VAT at that time, we wouldn't have been where we are. And now, when we did minimum wage in 2019, it was supposed to be $90 a month. Today, it's worth only about $40. And then you can barely buy a pair of shoes with the minimum wage right today.
Minimum wage, you can.
So, reality is that you've got to preserve value. Coming back to the oil sector, which is where, and I come from that neck of the wood, you can't, let me use a simple example. The pipelines are about 293 kilometers or so, and loads and loads. You can't break into a pipeline just like with a chisel or something. It's a very comprehensive, elaborate process. Then to actually suck the oil out, you have to seal it up. You need flow pumps to pump it into barges. Those barges have to go all the way to a mothership, and those motherships have to go all the way to so this are not jerrycan business. These are very sophisticated things. And when you are doing 100, 200, 300,000 barrels a day, God, I can tell you for sure, those things are not happening under darkness. There's a complete connivance, conspiracy going on. So let's not deceive ourselves. As long as you lie to yourself and people know you're lying to yourself, nobody will believe you. And therefore, the crisis of confidence starts. There'll be no confidence in what you say. Oh, we are dealing with things with oil. We are doing this about the exchange rate. We are doing this about interest rates. We are doing this about subsidy. We are doing this about ASU and NANS, and nobody believes you because you've got to start by believing what you are saying yourself to the public. That is what it is.
It's the way it comes across to me as a way of winding this up is that you talk about sincerity.
Yeah.
You talk about consistency over time. You talk about taking the painful decisions, looking at the global picture. And whether or not we are now prepared, as Mr. Arewani said, since we are now at the wall, whether we are now prepared to confront our reality, because we've been living, apparently, in some kind of wonderland for quite a while. But economically, it's going to be tough going ahead. And that's what this conversation for me has highlighted. So let me thank Dr. Biodun Adedipe, Mr. Paul Alaje, and Mr. Ruane for your time this evening. When I started and I said it's a dire situation, Mr. Ruane shook his head. But I think that's what this conversation has eventually brought to light, that it is a dire situation. But thank you, gentlemen. We'll take a break. When we come back, We'll continue more. We have just a little bit more to talk about in terms of the economy. Stay on with us.
We have seen in the last few years how huge resources were mismanaged, squandered, and wasted.
It's the first Independence Day speech of President Muhammadu Buhari, just months after he was sworn into office. Expectation of Nigerians had been heightened by campaign promises, which was built on change and the promise to tackle corruption, among other things. The country's mainstay was on the front burner even at this time. In October of 2015, price of Brent crude was $48.43 a barrel. Domestic production, according to data from the CBN, was 2.21 million barrels a day, while crude exports was 1.76 million barrels a day. These figures seem skewed to the president, which may be the basis for his promise of reform.
Preliminary steps had been taken to sanitize NNPC and improve its operations so that the inefficiency and corruption could be reduced to a minimum.
7 years later, as of June 2022, domestic production stood at 1.16 million barrels a day, while crude export was 0.71 million barrels a day, and price was at about $122 a barrel. Prices stayed above $100 until September, when partial lockdowns in Asia and recession threat pushed prices to about $90. Nigeria has lost its pride of place as Africa's biggest oil producer, an unwelcome development which has been attributed to oil thefts.
You have the issues of collaboration between even the oil companies and the oil importers.
The country, according to Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, loses 470,000 barrels per day of crude oil, amounting to $700 million monthly. The shrinking oil revenue means that the country's foreign reserves has not been getting enough funding.
The lower foreign reserves, you have the weaker exchange rate because you don't have the amount of foreign exchange to be able to finance your external operations.
The naira feels the pressure, going from 197 naira for $1 in 2015, 360 naira in 2019, and now about 420 naira in the official window, and more than 700 naira in the parallel market, which is more readily available. The situation is compounded with the country's imports rising from $51.92 billion in 2015, $88.74 billion in 2019, $2.71 trillion in 2021, which is 64.11% higher than the value recorded in 2020. The surging costs are captured in inflation data, which hit a 17-year high in August at 20.52, while food inflation stood at 23.12 year-on-year.
If the situation was just about inflation rate of 20.5%, it could have been tolerable. But the reality is much worse than that. In many cases, in many instances, prices have doubled, prices have risen by over 50%, in some cases even 200%.
Another burning issue is the surging debt, which will only increase with the 11.03 trillion naira deficit in the 2023 budget. Borrowings by the federal government of Nigeria, the 36 state governments, and the Federal Capital Territory was at 12.06 trillion naira in 2015. It hit 42.84 trillion naira as of June 30th, 2022.
There's also the ways and means. Money government takes directly from the Central Bank of Nigeria, operating of money, which is about 20 trillion.
Surging inflation and threatening debt distress is now common in many countries because of current economic headwinds. Following this, the World Bank has warned of global recession by 2023, following the continuous interest rate hike by central banks to curb inflation. The way of escape will be to boost production and consumption. Economists believe Nigeria can hedge against inflation and avert recession if the suggestion of the World Bank is adopted. But this will be gained by dealing with insecurity in the country. Ini John Mekwa, Channels Television News.
Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to the Channels Forum. Now, to shed more light on the state of Nigeria's economy and the federal government's interventions in that regard, I've been joined here in our studios by the Director General of the Budget Office of the Federation, Mr. Ben Akabweze. Good evening to you, Mr. Akabweze. Welcome.
Thank you, Ali. Pleasure.
Let's look at this. I'm sure, of course, you listened to the previous discussion that took place between me and Mr. Iwane and Dr. Adedipe and Mr. Alaji, and of course the headwinds that have been faced by the economy, both internal and external, which would be a good rationale for interventions to ensure that things don't go completely off course. On a general note, how do you think that has gone?
Well, there's without a doubt, I mean, the economy faces significant challenges. But let me say this, that somehow, I mean, even in that discussion that took place, I didn't hear a lot about the real solution and the crux of the problem, that the Nigerian economy, faces. I mean, the public sector and government's fiscal operations, which is the fact that government is not generating nearly enough revenues as it requires. There's a lot of fixation on the expenditure side of things and, on debt and all of that. The reality is, first of all, as I've said repeatedly, our problem is not that as government, our government is spending too much money. The truth is, government is not spending enough money. And the numbers are there to show. Our public expenditure to GDP ratio is at the bottom, even on the African continent. And that's why, public services are suffering, whether it's in health or education. That's why the infrastructure, faces significant deficits. Okay. It is, however, correct that we can be more efficient in our expenditure. And how can we be more efficient? There's some waste, admittedly, that we still need to cut. Okay. And then, of course, we need to also then really do a better job of, prioritizing how we spend the limited resources that are available. That means also that we need to take a hard look at, the subsidies, like the petrol subsidies, which is currently, the single largest item of expenditure out after personnel costs and perhaps debt service for the federal government. So these are the things that we need to really.
But then, if you say it that way, I guess maybe the next question, of course, when you say, okay, look, many people don't talk about the fact that we're not earning enough, we're not making enough. But usually, most governments, how they earn money is by taxing productive activities, and we're not producing, which was part of the subject of the last conversation, that we're not really producing. We're an import-driven economy, and therefore the question of the interventions, which I mentioned in introducing you, that is government coming in particular aspects of the economy to say, look, okay, look, we're not really doing so well here, but here's a direct intervention that may not necessarily be tied to economic conditions or allowing market forces to operate, but it's because you recognize that a lot of people are currently not producing, and if they're not producing, you can't tax them, and if you can't tax them, then the government doesn't make money.
Well, first of all, that's a fallacy, unless we don't believe the GDP numbers. The GDP is a measure of your domestic output. So whether you're importing or producing locally, and don't get me wrong, ideally you should produce as much as you can domestically. And if you did, your GDP number will be higher than it is. But even the imports, even if all that you do is trade, trading should be taxed.
Why is it not being taxed?
Well, that's the point. The reality is, first of all, most countries of the world, the biggest source of government revenue is taxation. And even within taxation, personal income taxes. But in Nigeria, aggregate personal income taxes is still under ₦1 trillion. Okay. The way it works, personal income taxes is in the remit of the state governments in Nigeria. In other federations, you have federal personal income tax, and you have state level income taxes. In Nigeria, all personal income tax is by the state. But we're talking about the Nigerian economy here, not the federal government. A lot of the states, a lot of the economic activity can be driven by the states. So when I talk about government being hampered by revenues, and when I talk about the low public sector revenues, because the public services that I spoke about, health, education, most of those really should be the remit of the state, government. But most of the states are not getting enough resources. So states, you'll have to go back to our history. Pre-colonial Nigeria and in the First Republic, taxation was the principal source of revenues for government. I have a theory that when the military intervened in their quest for legitimacy, they basically looked away from taxation, and their intervention coincided with, becoming a major oil producer and focused on basically funding government through resource rents. And that went on for decades. Now it's proving difficult to get back to the culture of taxation. A few states are doing better than others. I mean, last year now, Kaduna State has overtaken Delta State in terms of IGR, its internally generated revenues, because the government in Kaduna State is focused on in what needs to be done to drive to drive that. Many years ago, Kaduna was way below Delta State, for instance, in that. So I think that this also compounded by the fact that during the period when we focused on funding government by resource rents, the people were displeased by the value that they were getting from all of the resources. And so, positions have hardened in terms of a willingness to pay tax. And so there's massive tax, evasion. When you have a system where even our databases, now there's all kinds of biometric databases still not synced, and so people can actually be anonymous. There's no link between the property ownership records and the tax records, so you can't really tell whether the same guy precisely. So some guy shows up at the embassy, trying to justify his case for visa, and he's showing all of the assets that he owns, and then he has his tax clearance certificate. And the visa officer say, I can't match these two. The person who owns all of these cannot be the person who's paying this income, because the income that is declared for. So, that's what. If you take, we're talking about, we say we're the largest economy on the continent measured by our GDP. And that's correct. And there are even those who argue that the GDP is currently undermeasured because of the massive informal sector that we have.
And which is not captured.
Which is not necessarily fully captured. That's the view that is held strongly. The dimension of that undermeasurement is debatable. But it takes South Africa. In South Africa, personal income taxes compared to Nigeria is multiples of what Nigeria. So more than 20 times what Nigeria earns. Indeed, okay, in Nigeria there's only about 40 million people in the tax net. The top 1 million taxpayers in South Africa pay more taxes than all of the rest. All of the 40 million people in Nigeria who pay taxes. So we're not talking about taxing what doesn't exist. We're talking about taxing the income that exists. One of the slides that Mr. Rwane showed earlier on, that 2%. That 2% of Nigerians, that yes. Top slice.
The sophisticated elite.
Yes. The income, the share of, the income that they control is so huge that even if they were the only ones who paid tax and paid what was appropriate, we would be way ahead where we are currently in terms of tax collections.
Let me also bring you to something else, because of course, even if we were able to generate a lot of revenue and so on, then the issue of prioritization and allocation of such resources, which is where the budget and the budget office would probably come into play. And there are those, of course, there are always all those screaming headlines about double items in the budget and about provisions for items that have already been done. And that. So even if we leave out the issue of possible attempts to short-circuit the system, does it speak then to gaps within even the flow process of how the budget is prepared? I mean, you are in charge of the federal one, but one can take notice of some of the things you will say and probably apply them to the state levels as well. In terms of how budgets are prepared, I know that, I mean, elementarily, there used to be an envelope system, and then, of course, you had what they call the zero budget system, and then there were those who point, there were some states who also took a hybrid of both. But do you think it has more to do with capacity, for example? Or is it that we are dealing with the wrong system for our own environment? Or perhaps it's more than that?
Well, let me start with the federal government's budget that I currently have responsibility for. I think that sometimes all of those things are overhyped. If you take the federal government's budget for 2022, there are over 20,000 projects in that budget, okay? And it's not a perfect document. And there's no country's budget that is perfect. So if out of 20,000 projects, you found 200 that you label as duplications, does that suggest that people are not doing a good enough job? And even what we call duplications, okay? Sometimes in point of fact are not. So for instance, if you have the Rural Electrification Agency that has in its budget, say solar power projects, okay, in some communities in, say, Ekiti State. And then you go to the budget of the River Basin Development Authority, I think is a River Basin Development Authority that covers that area. And they also have solar power projects in some communities in Ekiti State. People say it's a duplication. But the point is to fully install solar power projects in those communities, you will need far more than the combination of the provisions made in those two budgets. And so at the point of implementation, there is a delimitation of which communities this agency is focusing on, which this agency is focusing on. because it's a procurement process. But those who look at the budget simply conclude that that is a duplication. You talked about the zero-based budget and the envelope system. I hear this all the time. The truth is, there is no budget system anywhere in the world that ultimately is not based on envelopes or ceilings. To do otherwise would be to engage in an exercise of wishful thinking, which budgeting is not. What is this envelope or ceiling? It simply establishes the fact that your resources are finite. The starting point in preparing a budget is to dimension the resources that are available to you. Those resources come principally from two sources: the revenues that you can generate and the debt that you plan to take. When you add the two, you have a finite amount of resources available. The starting point of the budget process is then to, apply a logical process to take that finite aggregate envelope and parcel it out as envelopes to the different sectors and the different ministries, departments, and agencies. What is then the zero-based budget is designed to substitute what was called incremental budgeting. An incremental budget simply says that once an item gets into the budget, it just stays there, in perpetuity. And every year, so people look at, last year we spent ₦1 billion. This year we just add we add 100 million, so it becomes 1.1. Zero-based budgeting says, in principle, that every year you have to justify the existence of that item anew in the budget. People see the same line or similar item in the budget year after year, and they just conclude that it's a repetition. But you see, take an agency that has 1,000 employees, and they've determined that they need 500 computers, for instance, to serve the 1,000 employees. But at the point of budgeting, due to resource constraint, they're told you can only get enough money to buy 100 computers this year. So what you see is that agency in year one will budget for 100 computers. In year two, you will see another 100 computers. For 5 years, you may be seeing 100 computers each year, which is simply to get them to the 500 computers that they need. It's not a repetition of the item. So there's a lot of uninformed commentary on the budget. And a lot of people don't even take the trouble of, reverting to the people who prepared the budget to ask questions before they go to town.
The other part of this, of course, is that your office and agencies which are in charge of the budget are supposed to work hand in hand with others in the course of the implementation process. So you have oversight, for example, Absolutely. Like with the National Assembly or with state assemblies for state governments and so on. This capacity or lack of understanding of the process that you just talked about, I mean, many of those who talk about these things or who raise, quote unquote, the alarm are members of these other agencies. They only report to the media, which then tends to, instead of probably looking at it more soberly because, in many instances they're interested in numbers, just go out there with the story. But I'm wondering if at the base, those you're supposed to work with understand this thing that you've just said. Because at the end of the day, if they don't understand it, there's no way they can work with you in implementing it. And if they don't do that, then there will always be inefficiencies in the allocation process and then the implementation, won't there?
Well, I think that by and large, they do. One of the things that we need to fix, and currently, I think the bill scaled second reading, last week. Nigeria doesn't have an organic budget law like, most serious countries in the world would do. You have a budget law that clearly defines the processes for budgeting, the responsibilities and all of that, and, basically, even including the timetable. They had timetable that sets, the responsibilities and timelines for doing what. Okay? That law is only just currently in the making. So obviously, that will improve. One of the things that will also result in, hopefully, is create a budget officer cadre, a core of budget officers who will make their career in budgeting. From today, you don't have that. What you have is administrative officers. And that's why every year, to be able to prepare the budget office has to train over 4,000 officers across all of the MDAs to be able to prepare the budget. By the next year, most of those guys you've trained have moved on to other, they've been transferred to other functions or other agencies of government. So, that skill is at an age-based, therefore isn't being really deepened as much as it should.
It's a tough one. I'm told I have just 1 minute to round this up. So I'm going to ask you this now, that given your experience and what we've discussed, if you were to set an agenda for people who are looking to take over administration in these twin areas in terms of the budgeting and in terms of raising the revenue profile, what have you found that would be something that they could look at that would work?
Well, as I said, raising our revenues is an existential, issue for us. As we do so, it will do two things: increase our capacity to spend and reduce our dependency on debt. There's been a lot of concern about, government borrowing, and justifiably so, because right now we're spending way too much in terms of percentage of our revenues in debt service, and that's really the challenge. But as you see, that goes back again to revenues. The reality is, if our revenues were growing as they ought to, our debt levels will not currently be a challenge. All over the world, post-COVID-19 resulted in $28 trillion of growth in public debt across the world. Public debt grew by 99%. Grew to 99% of GDP on the average across the globe. The rate of growth in our debt didn't even get near the global average. But the problem is because of our weak revenues. And that's been compounded by the fact that if you look at the 2022 budget now, oil revenues accounts for just 22% of projected government revenues. In 2015, that was 57%, right. And it used to be as high as 20%. So one of the things we must do is fix, because as much as we desire to diversify away from oil, in interim, we need to fix the challenges in the oil sector so that, the revenue generating capacity of that sector for government can be restored. The significance of the oil sector goes beyond just its revenue generating capacity, because it remains our principal, foreign currency earner. And because of what you alluded to earlier, the import-dependent nature of our economy, most of the other sectors, manufacturing, whatever, even agriculture, because the inputs, the machinery and all of that still, are still imported, are heavily import-dependent, and so they rely on that foreign exchange. So, again, you talk about inflation. As you heard from the other panel, a lot of inflation we're experiencing is pass-through imported inflation. Yeah. If we earned a lot more dollars, which right now is only the oil sector that can immediately give us that bump that we need. Today, our OPEC quota is 1.8 million barrels of crude per day. We have capacity to produce condensate at an average of 300 100,000 barrels per day. That is not even counted in the. So technically, we could be doing 2.1, 2.2 million barrels, but today we're doing, just barely over 1 million barrels. Imagine what if we restored to that sector and ramped up production. What an extra 1 million, barrels of could do, for government revenue, for foreign exchange, and that's the only way you can get the people make. The exchange rate is not something you wish. The exchange rate is a price for that, you call your currency, and it obeys the forces of demand and supply.
Indeed.
If the supply of dollars to this economy increases,
then of course
the Naira will strengthen. If it doesn't, the Naira will weaken.
Indeed. Mr. Kabweze, I wish we could go on because there's quite a bit that you've mentioned, which is a lot to chew, but let me thank you for your time on this Independence Day. Mr. Ben Kabweze, of course, is in charge of the Budget Office of the Federation. He's the Director General. Thank you for your time on the program this evening.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
We'll take a break on the Channels Forum, and then we'll come back for our final segment on the show. Please stay on the line. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us on the Channels Forum on this 62nd anniversary of an independent Nigeria. Let's acknowledge our studio audience once again, as well as our viewers joining us on the program from our various platforms. We thank you, and we continue to look forward to your feedback. Now to the position or positioning of our youth, their empowerment and roles in both tackling economic and political issues. Described as the leaders of tomorrow for a long time, worldwide trends are showing that the population in this bracket, where Nigeria is said to have about 70% of its citizens, are unwilling to wait for tomorrow to come. They are taking the lead in the introduction and use of technology, for example, and are now becoming more visible in the economic and political spheres. Even as we count down to the elections next year, how can this system go about removing the factors or roadblocks which have prevented the youth from going further to drive national development? On Channels Forum, I'm being joined here in the Lagos studios by Dr. Samuel Aikomogwe, Leadership and Change Management Strategist. He's an agent of change and advocate of lifelong learning. Thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
And joining us from the Abuja studios is Monica Mwenge. I hope I got that right. She is Chief Executive Officer of Nor Media. Thank you so much, Monica, for your time. Welcome to the program.
Good evening, Mr. Ladi. Thank you, and happy Independence Day, Nigeria.
Same to you. Let's begin this conversation from this issue of leaders of tomorrow and what that actually means today, and the fact that the decision is that the youth don't want to be leaders of tomorrow, they want to be leaders of today. The Not Too Young to Run bill, and now I'm going to ask you, I'm starting off with you, Monica, the Not Too Young to Run bill, or act as it is now, was supposed to remove all the barriers, or most of them, for the young to participate in the political space. Has it done that?
Oh my God. So first of all, I'm about to say that it's the greatest time to be alive as a young youth in Nigeria and Africa in general. But sadly, reverse is the case because youth are put at the back burner of everything. And in the political spheres of Nigeria, we have a low turnout of youth. And to be honest, the Not Too Young to Run has done quite a whole lot to bring this to the limelight. But we have issues of mentorship where the older generation is not working towards giving way to the younger generation. And the younger generation is not understanding and is frustrated. So there is a clash between the older generation and the younger generation. I mean, we have known that these are leaders were leaders when they became leaders when they were 30, when they were 20, when they were in their 20s. But coming back to 2022, I feel like our leaders should give way for the youth to be rebirthed, to have a way, to have to make, because you barely see youth in the political space these days. So, to be honest, I know that the president passed the bill, but the whole weight is still on Not Too Young to Run. Not Too Young is trying as much as possible to make this happen, but there's a lot going on in the country. There's godfatherism and what have you, even the issue of finance. I mean, look at when the issue of buying the tickets. Where do you expect a young person, a youth, to come up with 20 million to buy tickets? I mean, this is not fair. So there's just a whole lot, and there's a disconnect between the old and the young people. But hopefully in 2022, in 2023, things will get better. So, Mr. Ladi, it's really, really in a poor state, I must say. And I must commend the Not Too Young to Run for doing
Let me
best.
take it that you said that you know, it's really in a poor state, and come to Dr. Aikomogbe in Lagos and say that, look, it doesn't appear as if the law or that act by itself was supposed to change anything. It was just supposed to provide a framework within which the young were supposed to act. Now, the youth have 70% of the population in Nigeria. I mean, depending on how you define youth. In some instances, it's even more. So, I mean, there should be what people call the tyranny of the majority if the youth decided to take that up, because nobody can get into any office without their support. But that has not happened. That is not happening. And the chances that that is going to happen either next year or in the nearest future is still slim. Is it that the youth do not recognize this power, or is it, as Monica pointed out, that there are existential blocks between them and those who currently hold the reins?
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate the youths that are here, which is especially why this topic is relevant to them. There are so many paradigms that are wrong that we just get, we just swallow them. For instance, the youths are the leaders of tomorrow, and we just swallow them. Sometimes we go to church, we want to sing, say, I will never be ungrateful to you. You know, is that what you really want to? What you want is that you want to be grateful to God. But we sing and celebrate, I will never be ungrateful to you, for instance. That is not what you want to say. But why don't we say exactly what we want to say? So the government has made the provision to say not too young to run. It's a provision. But what if the youths are not ready to grab it? What if all of us are not even positioned to take the baton? Then there is a gap. So what I think is that the youths, us today, had to dish out that philosophy that says youth are the leaders of tomorrow and say youths are the leaders of now, today. So you don't need to, and take the responsibility, you know, you take the responsibility. Let me come philosophically using the seasons to describe where we are and where we ought to be. Now, we have the winter season, we have the spring, we have the summer, and we have the autumn. Now, the winter is a season that is not too pleasurable. It's not too pleasant, and that is the time of inflation. That is the time of poverty. That is the time you really don't like in your life. Now, it's like January of a month. You don't wish to be in January by tearing off January from the calendar and be in February. It's not possible. You still do the 31 days in January. Now, when you are in winter, like Nigeria, people describe Nigeria, say you're in winter, you don't wish you are in US or UK. You can only become better, smarter, and be wiser when you are in the winter, so you can live the winter. After the winter comes the spring. The springtime is a period of opportunity. What do you do in the period of opportunity? You take it. you take your opportunity. That's the only time, and it's never long. You take the opportunity. Not too young to run is a period of prosperity. It's a spring period. But how many of us have taken the opportunity to run it? What is happening in the political space today is that one man decided to take the opportunity, and we can see, and that was exactly what happened during Obama in the United States of America. By seeing that a woman is coming, another not too competent McCain is coming, and he plugged in, and it worked out for him. It will always work out when you take opportunity. Since 6,000 years ago, that is how it has been. Now, in the time of summer, that is when what you've done has started to generate, begin to grow, like you have gotten admission in the school. The bug of life will definitely come to attack the good thing you've done. But what do? You protect your crops. Nigeria got an independence in 1960. It was well celebrated, but the bug of life came to attack in form of military coup, and maybe we didn't protect our crops. We got democracy in 1999, which is a very good one, but the bug of life will always attack. Why will a student get to the university and all of a sudden they tell you the guy is not attending classes again? He has deferred admission. Why? The bug of life always come after the good things of life. But what do? You protect your crops. Each day you wake up, you stand at the guard of your heart. So when things come to attack, you are the one to block it. Someone told me that these big men are very stingy. And that was a bait. You know what I told him? I look at it, was a bait. It was a temptation. These big men are very stingy. Now, that was a dilemma. For me to say it's true and to quickly rebuke it, and I said, you mean I'm stingy? That was how I defeated that temptation. Now, you as the youth must know that at any particular point in time, your destiny is attacked, irrespective of your nation. You alone must defend your destiny. Nobody else defend your destiny. The first university I attended, which I call the first university, was in the village of a man who had a pickup that supplies water, canopy, and what was written on the back of the pickup, face your life. It became a noun. When you want water, you say go to face your life house. Till tomorrow, nobody knows his real surname other than what? Face your life. When you know that, you don't have problem in, you can always find a way, a framework to leave any form of poverty. Nigeria got independence in 1960, again, economic independence. What about social independence? What about educational independence? Now, sir, the problem we have in this country is simple. The people who are available and deliberate to solve the problems are less than the people who are deliberate and want to create the problem. That is the problem. It's not a problem. That is where we are. But there will be a time we'll be at par. And there will also be a time the people who are deliberate and willing to change the country will be more than the people who are deliberate and willing to spoil the country. Then the country will be better than it is. But who will do it?
Let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you, Dr. Aikobogbe, and put this in some form of our current situation. There are those who say, and I said so at the start when I said, oh, that the country is such that the youth form the largest population, so one would expect that there will be a tyranny of the majority. But not only does it appear, and you alluded to it when you said, are they ready? But and now I think I see Monica there, so I hope that she can now hear me. Monica, I guess this is for you because we're running out of time. Let me ask you this, that it does appear as if the women who form the bulk of the youth are also missing or are unable to take advantage of this. So when you talk about, not being able to see how it is, the disconnect between the young and the old, is it also that the young, like Dr. Aikobogbe has just said, they are unprepared for this responsibility and therefore, having been given the opportunity, they are unable to take advantage?
Mr. Ladi, I cannot say that the young people are not prepared. Last weekend, I was in a gathering of young entrepreneurs, and we were of a number of 50. And this group had different people in tech, people in agriculture, people in media, and it was a gathering of beautiful young minds. So, to be honest, young people are ready. It is just that there are factors and issues hindering them from achieving these goals. Factors like access to finance, factors like mentorship, factors like personal reasons. The young people need to be mentored. The young people need access to grants. They need swift access to bank loans. You find out that when these young people go to banks sometimes for loans, they end up getting, they stall them, and at the end of the day, their ideas are taken and even bought or stolen. So to be honest, young people are vibrant, young people are ready to do it. You check the economy, there's barely any young person on the mainstream of the economy, both in political and both economic and political spheres. But the young people are thriving. Okay, Mr. Ladi, why is it that when the young people migrate, like we call it in the young term, Japa, now these young people migrate, and when they migrate, you see them doing wonderfully well, both in academics, both in sports. I mean, we have a new world champion from Nigeria. So there is no way that I would agree that the young people are not ready. The only thing that the young people need is good mentorship. The young people need to be carried along. The young people need access to grants to finance their business ideas, to finance their startups. That is why you see that they get frustrated and put their hands into different things. There are so many beautiful young minds in Nigeria. I mean, I feel like the government is not doing enough with the human capital they have. We have Nigeria is number 6 on the table of largest young people in the world. And this is, to me, this is a untapped crude. The government needs to see that this is an asset, not a liability. They need to work on and implement structures that will enable these young people to know that they are being carried along and their dreams would come true because they will get grants when they need to. They will get access to mentorship when needs be. And also the government should work on, start opening universities for entrepreneurs, universities like universities for professionals, like we need schools for interiors, we need schools for manufacturing. There's a lot that can be done. I mean, just look at the Asian tigers. They all started from manufacturing and exporting. Now look at where they are. So at the end of the day, the government is not using the crude, which is the human capital. We, the youths, are in large number, but there's high rates of unemployment. I mean, we have 33 staggering % of unemployed youths walking around the country without nothing.
Indeed. Indeed, you're right. You're right, Monica. You're right, Monica. But
how does the young person?
I'm going to have to stop you
yes,
there
Mr.
because we've completely run out of time, and it's just to say that, of course, those who are listening to you and Dr. Aikomogwe here in our studios in Lagos will, of course, I assume, have taken 1 or 2 lessons, including those that both of you referred to, who are seeking the authorities to direct the affairs of this country in the days to come. But let me thank Dr. Aikomogwe here in Lagos and Monica Mohege in our Abuja studios. Thank you both very much for joining us on the program today. Well, our time is up, and we want to thank you for allowing us to be part of your Independence Day activities. We want to thank our panel members who joined us from the Lagos, Abuja, and Maiduguri studios, as well as our studio audience here, and those who joined us as well virtually. All our viewers on our various platforms, we also thank you. On behalf of the entire production team working on this edition of Channels Forum, I am Ladia Kiridulali saying thanks for watching and good night.